Good morning. We're here today for the Crewe Open Day, an event which attracts thousands and thousands of visitors, as can be witnessed by this great gathering we see here today. The railways have long since fascinated people of all generations and backgrounds. From their introduction in the 19th century right until the present day, people have held their immense size, character and power in high regard. Britain has a number of important railway towns: Derby, Doncaster, but perhaps the most famous is Crewe. And today is their open day.
Yeah, Crewe Works has had a long history of open days. Going back into the 19th century when on special occasions the old London North Western Railway and the LMS would open the works up. The real modern open day started around about the 1970s with the idea of a local vicar who saw the possibility of making substantial amounts of money for local charities. I personally got involved in 1989 and the first one was 1991, but some of the committee had been involved before that. The first one we did was very much an old railway style event, but since then we've applied modern management techniques. We've got critical path analysis, business plans, marketing plans, and the event has really taken off since then. The essence of today's event and what most people get out of is nostalgia, because we're able to recreate the scenes of the past and scenes they can't see again, and they can see artifacts, nameplates and locomotives that they saw in the childhood and they want to come back in and see them. And of course you've got the diesels and the diesel fraternity who increasingly see diesel locomotives disappearing off the track with the withdrawal of the 37s and 47s, and of course they can come here and see them in the setting where they were built and where they were repaired for so many years. So it's win-win for everybody and it's a nice day out.
This is a 1919 Simplex built at Bedford. It's an 040 shunting locomotive and it worked at Pearson's Potteries in Chesterfield from 1919 till 1974. It had run down to the main line each day and pick up 2 or 3 wagons, take them up into the works where the raw materials would be offloaded, and then during the day the finished pottery would be loaded onto the wagons, and then it had dragged them back down to the exchange sidings where it would be taken away by a pickup freight train. These simplexes were built to be driven by anybody really. In the literature it said they could be driven by a boy or a girl in the original literature. But the way you drive it is you've got a clutch, you've got the direction lever, so you can go left to right, and then you've got this here, you've got 2 speeds, high gear and low gear. So once you'd start off in low gear and then you'd double the clutch, which you've got a crash gearbox, and crunch it into high gear, and away you go. You can get about 12 miles an hour out of it and it'll pull 100 ton on the flat. So they're quite strong little things, but so you can pull about 4 or 5 wagons with it if you was on a nice flat piece of track. And unlike most locomotives now, they've got air brakes. This only had an handbrake, and they're easy enough to get started, but stopping's the problem, especially when you've got a load of weight on. It's a matter of just keeping just a little bit on, brake shoes just biting, and then when you want to stop, wind it on, knock it into neutral, and hopefully you'll stop.
Some of these locomotives date back to the late 19th century and have been lovingly cared for and restored by their new owners since they were withdrawn from Britain's railways all those years ago. These locomotives will continue to be looked after for many years to come. But what about the lines they ran on? Well, they were not so lucky. The British Railways modernisation plan of the 1950s was an attempt by British Rail to upgrade and improve its infrastructure, most of which still predated the Second World War. when it was in the hands of the four major rail companies: the LNER, the GWR, the Southern and the LMS. The modernisation plan of the 1950s involved spending vast amounts of money on the purchasing and development of new locomotives and rolling stock. In fact, some of the locos here today bear witness to that plan. But what they didn't do was examine the role of the railway, what was needed, and the implications of changing age-old working practices. The result was that Britain's railway finances plunged deep into the red. In the early 1960s, Harold Macmillan's government, with Ernest Marples as Transport Minister, believed that the future of Britain's transport lay in the development of the roads, and the railways were a relic of a Victorian era and had no future. In fact, many people believe that Dr Ernest Marples' view on this matter was not entirely unconnected with his previous role as a director of a major road construction company. In 1961, Dr Richard Beeching was appointed chairman of Britain's Railways, with a brief to cutting the spiralling losses of the railway system. He made a complete study of the railway, and his view was that if any part of the system was not paying its way, then it should be closed down. Thus, the remaining core of the system could then be restored to profitability. The Beeching Report, The Reshaping of Britain's Railways, was published on the 27th of March 1963. It spelled the final nail in the coffin for more than 6,000 miles of railway track, and a name that will go down in history: the Beeching Axe. 6,000 miles of track were to close out of a total of 18,000. Most of these were to be branch and rural lines, although even the main lines weren't safe, with some losing stations along their routes and others being run as freight only. By the early 1970s, the closures finally stopped, when it became clear that the Beeching initiative wasn't working.